everyone, it's Leanne. Welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. I have a fun little Halloween card to share with you. This is very simple. I was trying to keep it light and pretty easy to make with some layering. So let's begin and look at the supplies that I used. So I have an A2 size folded card that I've cut. I have a piece of mixed media cardstock from Strathmore, and then a piece of Nina Solar White cardstock for stamping. This is the stamp set I'm going to use, and this is Happy Howloween from Fawn, and I have the waffle die cuts as well. And this is Grassy Meadow, I believe it's called Grassy Meadows, die cut for the trim, and I'll put the links in the description below with the names. I'm going to use Recollections embossing powder, that's an Eggplant. And then these two distress inks are Chipped Sapphire and Mermaid Lagoon, and I have Memento Tuxedo Black ink for stamping because I'm going to do some COPIC coloring. So I'm just going to lay out my pieces first. I'm working with the cardstock, just a general piece of cardstock here, cut to the size of my card. And I'm just placing my elements and measuring out where I want the trim to happen and where I'm going to have the cutout for the background. And I want to make sure it's even on both sides. So I just use my ruler and make a tick in the same position on each side. It makes it easier to line up that way. So I'm doing my grassy border first. And so just taping into the area of where I'm not going to use the paper. So that tape is touching what will not be my artwork. I always try to put the tape on the other side if that's possible. Sometimes it's hard to do that with stamps, but in this case it all fell over the one line. So that was easy to do. Now I'm measuring this out, and I'm going to cut a strip off of the paper that was the negative part, the wasted part of my die cut, because I want to have a strip of paper across the top to hold my sentiment. So I'm just going to trim this with my super handy paper cutter. I love this paper cutter. It just sits on my art cart beside my desk, and I can just pick it up and quickly chop something and then just toss it aside. It's awesome. It's so much easier than using the ruler and the X-Acto knife. So I'm just placing my elements again. I have my top piece at the top there where my sentiment's going to be. I'm going to have my little puppy howling at the moon. And so I'm happy with the placement. I've moved all the elements off the card. This is on the mixed media cardstock now. So I have the moon placed where I want it, and underneath I have a piece of paper to catch the embossing powder. I'm marking out the edges with pencil, and then I'm going to mark the height of the moon and then the width of the moon at the top. And this is going to help me with placement when I stamp the embossing. I need to move that stamp out of the way to prepare the surface. I'm using just kitchen flour so that my embossing powder doesn't stick where I don't want it to, and that way I don't get stray embossing bubbles or that sort of thing. So I'm going to use Versamark stamping ink. This is a watermark ink. It's clear and sticky. It's a mess to clean up, but it works awesome for embossing. So I'll just get my stamp ready, and following the lines on the paper that I marked previously, making sure that my moon fits within that grid that I made. And I've stamped that down, and then my favorite part is putting the embossing powder on and seeing the stamped image come to life. And I just shake that off, trying to get the grains on every possible sticky part of the stamp. And then I'm going to use my brush, my mop brush that I used for the baking powder, or the kitchen flour, I'm sorry, and just brush off the excess, that any loose hairs or loose bits of embossing powder. And so there you can see what it looks like after I've run it underneath my heat tool off camera. It doesn't take too long, and it has a really beautiful effect. So I'm going to do the distress ink background now. So because it's a moon, I want to work in a circular pattern. So I want my ring around the moon in the brightest color. So I'm going to use Mermaid Lagoon first. And so I'll speed this up so you can see all of the coloring. Now, one thing to mention with embossing a heat gun, I find that it works best if you hold your gun away from your paper and slowly work towards bringing it closer to your paper as that paper heats up, as the embossing powder heats up. I find that if you put the heat gun cold right to close to your artwork that you're trying to emboss, you'll get bits of the embossing powder flying off. They don't stick that well. So it's nice if you can let it gradually heat up, or if you can come in with a really warm heat gun, don't put it to your artwork until it's really warm, and then slowly move towards your artwork that you're embossing, and then by then it starts to cure and that embossing powder melts down and doesn't move or fly off the paper. So that way you get a nice clean embossing. Maybe I'll do a video on that in in a future episode and show just my technique and what I do for that. So here I'm just working the rings and I'm going back over each ink and blending as best I can the way I think that it looks good, and not worrying too much about the top and the bottom, even though I've done the entire page just because it's easier. We'll only be seeing the strip within where the moon is. So now I'm going to work on my stamping and do my coloring to get that ready for the card. I'm coming in with Memento Tuxedo Black ink on the little Pooch, and this is the best ink pad I found for coloring with Copic markers. I really like the result. It doesn't smear and it dries really quickly. So I'm stamping out all the elements that I want in my scene. I have a little costume for my Poochie and his little Halloween pail for collecting his treats. So I'm coming in with E11, which is a favorite Copic marker. I like all the light colors, and this is a beautiful brown. And I'm just laying down the base with that color and then using E23 to do my shadows, bringing it up from the bottom and envisioning my light source coming from the upper right corner. So just laying out shadows where I think they'll be, and I like to block out shadows with light colors first. And this way I can see if they're working and if they're in the right placement. And then if they are, I'll come in with a deeper color and just richen those shadows up a little bit more once I'm happy with their placement. So I had a lot of fun coloring this little guy and just deciding how I wanted my puppy to look. You know, you could do a Dalmatian, or you could do a dark puppy or a light puppy, or there's a lot of different colors and options and patterns. So I decided just to do him a light color, and then I'm going to add some darker colors in at the end. So now that I have my shadows in place and I like where they are, I'm coming in with E15 and just making them a little bit darker, a little bit richer, and E23 as well. So just slowly emphasizing those shadows. And when I lay down a shadow, I like to come back in with that base color, that light color, and just smooth out the upper edges of that shadow. So now for my Poochie color, I'm going to come in with some darker Copics next. So I decided to do the ear and the tail a darker color. I've seen other puppies like this and I thought that'd be cute. I like those rich colors, but I didn't want to put the darker colors on the face because I want to make the details still stand out. I want to be able to see his eyes and his little mouth and not have that totally in darkness. I try to keep the faces lighter. So I decided to save my darker elements for his ear and his tail. And then I'm going to come in and put little dark feet on him, kind of like he's got socks or something. It reminds me of my kitty. She has some feet like that are different colors, and they look like little socks. I always think it looks so cute on her, so I decided to do that on my puppy. So I'm going to color the Halloween pail next, and I'm using really bright oranges and a yellow base. I really enjoy coloring this because I love to pull out the bright colors, the bright Copics, and they always have such a beautiful saturation of color. And so I'm doing a shadow up from the bottom of the pail in the medium tone orange, which is YR04, and the base is in Y23. I did the darkest orange inside the pail as well, and I'm using that dark color, that YR07, to create the lines on my pumpkin, so the folds where it bubbles in. And then coming in with a warm gray, I'm just adding a hard shadow on the little bone sticking out of the pumpkin pail. For his costume, or I guess I should say her, it's a ballerina, or I guess a boy could wear a ballerina costume too, but I'm doing this in pink. So I'm coloring in with a base of that pink color, which is RV00, and then highlighting with V12, just doing some shadows, and then RV17 is a brighter color, but it also adds a richer shadow too. So just adding a pop of color in at the end with that RV17. I don't have to use much of it. It's pretty rich and it goes a long way. So just adding it in at the end there. So I have everything colored and I'm ready to put the dies down and run this through my die cutting machine, my Sizzix die cutting. So I like to use Post-it tape and trying to keep the tape to the outside edges of those dies, like I mentioned with the grassy border, because that way I find that the tape sometimes can make a mark on your artwork if it's overlapping. So I try to keep all the tape to the outside edges. So I have everything run through and it pops out so easy once you do run it through the die cutting machine. So I'm just cleaning up and taking the tape off my dies so I can put those away. And I have everything ready now and I can begin building my card. So I like to put the elements in place just to make sure that positioning is good. I've got my embossing down and I can still work with the spacing really well. It's all coming together nicely. So I'm going to stamp my sentiment next on that top piece that we cut earlier. I've used some frog tape just to hold down the strip of paper. I find that the Post-it tape is great, but it doesn't always hold very well, and I really wanted to keep this flat on the desk. Because this is a new stamp, I haven't stamped this sentiment before. I'm just stamping it on a spare piece of paper first to make sure that there's no gaps in the coverage of ink on the paper. It stamped really well, so I was able to stamp the sentiment successfully, and I didn't have any white spots in the stamp. So I'm going to put that on my card with some with some foam tape, and I love foam tape. It's so fun. I use it in almost all my cards, and it just gives such a nice effect. It gives us layers and gives a three-dimensional look, but it doesn't take much to just give it such a nice effect. Now I'm looking at the base here, and I feel like I should have a bigger grass area and have that grass line come up into the bottom of the moon. So it feels like you're just getting a sliver of the sky and just peeking through and seeing that moon ever so slightly. So I'm going to cut a bigger piece there. I'm going to color in my moon first, and I'm using the Jelly Roll pens. Now I think these are the ones that have the lightning on them, and they have like little shooting stars on the lid, and they have just a glittery look to them. They're so pretty. So I just used the purple to color in my moon, and then I'm going to put on my new grass background, or my grass border, with some foam tape as well. So I do have that larger size, and I'm happier with this. I think it'll give a better area for the puppy to sit on and not have him peeking over the grass like I had originally intended to do. Now normally I line this up on my desk to put it together, but I found just with the foam tape creating the space, it was just harder to line up and get a perfect even edge there. So I decided to lay it down on my desk and match up the edges by hand. And so I like how this is coming together. I'm really excited with the little sliver of sky showing through. I really wanted this to be a simple, light card. And I do like the distress inks, but they do create a darker color, so I just wanted to have a bit of that showing through. So getting my elements in place, I'm using my tape roller just to tack a little bit of tape on the back. And then with my knife, I can see the position and just push them into place. And now it's time to put the costumes on too. So I use my tape roller, and I just put a little bit of tape ever so slightly on the back of these pieces. And then finding the spot where I want them and just pushing them into place. I'm coming in with that, I believe it's RV00, that pink, just to add it into the bone, because I found that the pink was all concentrated on the Pooch in his costume, or her costume, but there was nothing bringing that color over, carrying it over into the accessories, so I felt that it just added a little bit of balance by putting that pink on the bone as well. So here is a look at the finished card. I had so much fun creating this, and it was super easy. Just some die cuts, distress inks, and color, and coloring is always fun. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you're notified the next time I post a video. Thank you so much for watching.